Sherry's going to introduce our next speaker.
Miss Kim. Kim was born and raised all over Wyoming before finally landing in Riverton just under 4 years ago. Kim is a mother of two beautiful children, Desmond, age 9, and Jasmine, age 7. Kim has been married to, as she puts it, her wonderful husband, the love of her life, JD, for 3 years now. It will be 3 years in June. Together, they are working hard in 2 new businesses. And the most important decision they have made in the last few years is becoming Christians and dedicating their life to Christ. After becoming a Christian, she hit the ground running. Wasting no time, she is eager to learn the gospel. She works hard, teaches children, and has a great way of relating to teens, giving them guidance and direction for their lives because of the wisdom she gained from hard experiences in her early life that she had to endure. Kim is the flower that comes from the seed that was planted by Christians, Christian friends who introduced her to Jesus Christ. God was working in her life even in the early days before she knew who God really was. Kim is learning daily to walk in the light, planting seeds, living for God, while abiding in this world but not being a part of it. Kim told me that her and JD's life goal is to raise their kids knowing how to navigate this world with hearts and eyes for Jesus and the good word. I present to you Kim Klingenberg.
Thank you, Sherry. Hello, everyone. So as she said, my name's Kim. And before we start, I want to play a little game. So if you've made it to the tea party today, I want you to raise your hand. Okay, so that means everybody's hands should be up. Everyone's hands should be up. So every time I'm gonna ask a question, and if that question applies to you, you're gonna put your hand down or keep it up. Okay, so every time I say something, we're gonna put our hands down. So first question: if you were brought to church as a child and are still with the church, put your hand down. Okay.
Any church?
Yes, any church. Just if you were brought to church as a child and then you still come to church, put your hand down. So, a couple people. Okay. Down. So everyone's hand should be starting in the air, and then as we ask these questions, put your hands down. Okay. So everyone's hands in the air. Okay. If you've been with the church for more than 20 years, put your hands down. Yes, any church. Wow, there's like very few people left that haven't been. If you've been with the church for longer than 10 years, put your hands down. More than 5? Okay. Here's a twist. If you went to church before and then left, but are now back, put your hands back up. We had several hands that were down and went back up. And that gives me goosebumps seeing God bringing people back after they left. Gives me hope that being all in isn't for nothing. Okay, so everyone can put their hands down. When you looked around, did you see that with every question, hands went down? What if time with the church was how we measured being all in for Jesus? We still had hands in the air, even after that last question. Does that mean that we are any less than any other woman in this room? Absolutely not. Being all in for Jesus is way bigger than just being a part of the church. I think we can all agree on that. Beyond that, it's very personal for each of us. James 22:1 says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says." And this verse is so convicting to me. God is going to speak to me in ways that I could have never imagined. But what if all I do is just hear it and I don't follow through? How can I be all in for Jesus? So now if we go back to the game, did you notice that my hand was up the whole time? And it's because, as Sherry said, I've been with the church for all of 3.5 years, and I've been baptized since the fall of 22. I'm just a baby in some eyes. So why, of all people, am I the one up here talking to you? Because if you remember, even the woman at the well had a lesson to teach us. Granted, I'm not on husband number 5 or anything, but I had a life before Jesus, one that makes my all-in for Jesus look slightly different than most. I was raised in an almost anti-religious household. We didn't go to church ever, and it wasn't something that we even really talked about. When my friends invited me, I was always told no. And other than school, we rarely left the house. My father used to say that he'd burn if he ever stepped aside in a church, but it turns out he realized it's just much harder to hide abuse when you attend church on a weekly or monthly basis. And you might think that those years that I walked alongside Jesus unknowingly were the hard ones, but they really weren't. Don't get me wrong, since taking the plunge, as my lovely husband calls it, my life has been blessed. I own 2 successful businesses. My kids are happier and healthier than ever. I have a loving husband who puts God first and finds ways to serve him daily. And on top of that, I have some of the closest friendships I've ever had in my life. But these last 3 years have been hard despite all of that. And I'm not sure what I expected. John 16:33 says, "In this world you will have tribulations." But that's not the end of the verse. And so this is probably where I got that hopeful, optimistic views. It continues to say, "But be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." And John chapter 17 goes on to talk about Jesus praying for his walk, praying for the walk of his disciples, for the walk that we as believers have. He prays that we don't walk alone, but with him, because this walk isn't easy. Take Luke 9:57 through 61, for example. Can anyone tell me that story without reading it? Luke 9:57. As we were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, let me first go bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Leave the dead to bury their own dead. But for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Yet another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home." And Jesus said to him, "No one puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." So Jesus was asking these men to give up what they were doing and come walk with him. And each one says, "Sure, I'll walk with you, but hold on, let me go do something first." Can you imagine that? Like Jesus is physically there with them, and they still cannot give up their earthly desires to go walk with him. We do that same thing now. We are asked to obey and follow him, and we struggle. There's something always more pressing to take care of or to do. Sometimes the things we are called to do are the most uncomfortable things. We find them too milky, too time-consuming, or just plain not what we want to do. And in our defense, Moses did it too, but we also see where that got him. Honestly, I wouldn't be standing up here if it hadn't been for someone who heard Jesus call her to help and decided to act on it. So in June of 2020, I moved myself and my kids here to live with my then boyfriend after the end of my nasty divorce. We didn't exactly have housing or daycare figured out. I moved here with a job opportunity, and I figured I would have all of that planned by the time the kids came back from their dad's house. But halfway through his part of the summer, my ex-husband calls me and says, "Can't take the kids anymore. He's lost daycare. Couldn't find anything else." So of course, as any mother would, I took my kids back. I had no clue what we were going to do. We stayed in a hotel for a little bit. The closing on our house that we were trying to buy just kept getting pushed further and further back. And well, our lease was up. We didn't have anywhere. So here we were, no daycare, no house, and not sure what to do. My husband, then boyfriend, tells his boss about it. And next thing I know, him and his wife are offering us to move in with them and that she would watch the kids while I went to work. And it wasn't something they had to do in any way, shape, or form. And honestly, I never expected it. She had just moved to town herself in May and had 4 boys. So a house full of 6 kids at that time. It was a lot. But if you ask Nicole today, she'll tell you something told her to do it. So that Sunday, when she asked me if I wanted to go to this church with her, a church that she hadn't gone to yet, there was no way I was going to say no. It didn't matter that I didn't know what I was doing. She'd just taken me in. Like, we couldn't say no. So from there, our friendship boomed. We went to church every Sunday together, had dinner multiple times a week, and faced deaths in our family together. And she ended up being my maid of honor at my husband's and my wedding. My daughter still swears that that wedding was for her and Nicole's youngest son, and not for me and her dad. They were 4 years old then. Her and her family have moved back to Oklahoma, but she's still my bestie, and the impact of her being all in will never leave me. In my early days of church, I used to sit quietly and take notes to ask her and her husband later. So much of it went straight over my head. Bible study was always the worst because we had a forum-style Bible study, and it just seemed like people could pull references and verses from nowhere, and I just didn't know any of it. Finally, one day, I had raised my hand and asked something that I think shocked Harold. Now, I have his permission to tell this story, but so I won't get in any trouble. But instead of shaming me or embarrassing me, he just answered my question without skipping a beat. He answered it. I had asked who Judas was and what they were talking about. Something as simple as knowing who Judas was. I didn't know. I couldn't tell you. And they were going on and I was just lost. It was nothing. But I think it took him aback to realize that I really, truly didn't know anything. And I mean anything. Shortly after, he changed Bible studies, and our families started to get together outside of church so I could ask more questions and understand what being all in really meant. And part of our all in at that time meant that the extra fellowship and studying and asking questions. And of course, Harold and Courtney answered my questions as best as they could and prayed that someday I could get over the last hurdle I had before becoming baptized, which almost didn't happen. You see, my husband and I being baptized actually was an issue for a few members of the church, which didn't make sense. At the time, my husband didn't serve in any roles in the church. We didn't partake in communion, and I thought we were being respectful of the others. I thought that this decision shouldn't be taken lightly and shouldn't be one to rush. But I guess not everyone felt that way. After coming for roughly a year, I had one person tell me that we needed to leave. She had mistaken my ignorance and hesitation as evil. She quoted 1 Corinthians 5:13 to me. It says, "God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you." And in her mind, she was doing that. She was living all in her way, and her all in didn't give me time to figure anything out. 1 Corinthians was taken drastically out of context in that. And I know that now. But at the time, I didn't. I didn't know that it was talking about sexual immorality within the church body. But I was just someone who did not get that. I didn't understand God's grace. I'd spent the first 25 years of my life being told I wasn't good enough and that I'd never be good enough. That I'd done things while in survival mode that no one should have to do. I was holding on to that shame and guilt, and my biggest hesitation for being baptized was I truly couldn't be forgiven for those things. I was far too broken and too messed up to be saved. I couldn't be all in even if I wanted to, and that's exactly what her words had said to me. But you remember how I talked about Jesus in John chapter 17? He prayed for us, for our walk, and how we do not walk alone, and I was not alone in that moment. He had not abandoned me, and in fact, he'd called others to me. They accepted their call. I gained a grandmotherly figure, unlike my own, a sister, 2 more families with kids to play with mine. The friends within the church we already had became our family, and within that same year, that family baptized us down by the river. That's all my sunshine and rainbows, right? That's the end of it? I don't think so. Sherry hit on this as well. Once you become baptized, you think, oh, it's all sunshine and rainbows. But that's not how it hits. The devil still plays. He plays harder now. It was just the beginning. My all-in had to shift. It had to change. I needed to listen and act on the things that I was being called to do. I've always had a passion for youth and protecting them from the things that I did and went through. So when we suddenly had teens and no teen leader, I'd stepped up. And I assure you, I am not perfect. But the work I do with them is helping me learn and grow with Jesus. And I mean, hopefully the kids are learning something too. I had to stop making excuses for why one event or another did not fit into my schedule and started making my schedule fit into being there for others and for God. I had to practice patience when God said it wasn't my time for something. I've been humbled and put in uncomfortable positions. I've had to fight the devil when he pulls the same punches he always has with me. Am I enough? When I had originally written this 2 months ago, I had included a line about believing that Satan had made camp in our living room growing up. But over the last few weeks, I've realized he wasn't camped there. Why would you camp somewhere that you know you've won? No, he'd much rather camp in the heart of Christians. C.S. Lewis wrote a book about this. Harold, our preacher, he did an entire sermon once on the book. It's called The Screwtape Letters. But I had missed a lot of those important parts. I was just too new to see it. To sum up the book, it's about a senior demon writing letters to his junior demon who's trying to keep this man from being all in for Jesus. The junior demon makes camp in this man's heart and tries to tempt him away from God. Letter after letter, the temptations are becoming more extravagant and reckless, but he isn't having any luck. Screwtape, the senior demon, tells him that isn't how you win a soul. You need to take a more subtle approach. He says the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turning, without milestones, without signposts. Clearly, this is a fictional book. But isn't this something we are facing now? Slow, gradual temptation? Isn't that all the more reason to be all into Jesus in every aspect of our life, though? Not to give him any foothold within our life, because he will take it. And it will be slow, and it will be gradual. It starts with small changes, prioritizing other things over going to church, thinking you know the word and therefore not making time to study, finding fellowship with other believers unfulfilling. But then it starts to progress. Our prayers turn selfish, our pride takes over, our egos win, and we forget what's important. We no longer let God lead. We are no longer all in. And the last stage is taking others down with us. Division is one of the devil's greatest strategies. Someone once told me it's called church hurt. Do you remember in the game how I asked if anyone had left the church but had come back? We had hands raised. If in this room of, 75 or so, we've had people leave and come back, what about the ones that haven't? They may not have fully walked away from God, but they wouldn't be considered all in anymore, would they? Jaded by the church hurt, too angry to want to evangelize or fellowship. And dare I say it, but there may still be some that do come to church and that aren't all in. It might be the very woman next to you, or you never know, it might be you. Back in November, my mental health had hit a low that I hadn't experienced in years. I had to face some of the traumas that I hadn't dealt with yet. Some of that shame and guilt from my past was resurfacing. And my own church hurt was very much real. I'd started to listen to my own demons, wondering if he was right. Was I not enough for God? And if I wasn't enough for him, how could I be for those kids out there? Questions had been raised about my ability to guide the youth with my limited years of faith. But in the beginning of this, we all kind of agreed that years mean nothing when it comes to faith, as long as we can be all in and live all in. And it took me a few days to realize that I was forgetting just that. I was forgetting who was there with me. Standing beside me was Jesus, calling me to surrender the fear, the hurt, the anguish. He wanted me to face the uncomfortable position I had found myself in. He wanted me to be all in and to remember he was there, and not just him, but his army too, my army. And Jesus will always be there, and not just for me, but for you too. He will call an army for you, and he will call you to be a part of an army. All you have to do is surrender to him, do the unexpected and uncomfortable thing, listen and act when he calls you, practice patience when others all in look very different than you. So what is he calling you to do? And are you going to answer? Or is there a different voice at play?